Thank you. And I have you sign.
Put that one down again.
Nice.
This is a long name.
All right, well, it's 1:30, so I'm Sarah Hadd. I'm the Vice Chair of the Land Use Review Board. Today is a public meeting of the City of Rutland's Tier 1A pre-application. If you're online, you were just asked to be required to accept the Teams disclaimer to rejoin the meeting once recording has begun, which it has. We're providing public access to the meeting via Teams online video conference with additional access offered by telephone, as detailed in the meeting notice. If you're having a problem using Teams on your computer, you can call into the meeting on your telephone by dialing 802-828-7667 and entering 951-798-159#. We ask all phone and online attendees place themselves on mute now. To communicate during the meeting from your phone, press *6 to unmute and announce that you'd like to speak. Wait to be acknowledged by me before you continue speaking. For those present at the physical location, please sign in if you've not already done so. The recording has been initiated, and I'd like to, I guess, without any further ado, introduce our Tier 1A reviewers today. As I said, I'm Sarah Hadd, and
Quinn Mann, District Coordinator with Land Use Review Board.
Kirsten Sultan, one of the board members.
And Pete Kopsko, I'm also a district coordinator with the Land Use Review Board.
all right, fantastic. We have a small group today, so I'm happy to maybe just go around the room and do introductions too. I don't know if you want to continue on.
Sure. Sarah Furman, the Executive Director of CEDAR, so Chamber and Economic Development for Rutland County.
Somehow with syllables in mind. Sean Atkins, Executive Director of the Rutland Redevelopment Board.
Pete Franzoni, Board of Aldermen. John Kalish, citizen of Rutland.
Janet Hurley, Chair of the Land Use Review Board, but I'm not a Tier 1A reviewer on the Rutland application, so.
Elizabeth Peebles, State Architectural Historian with Vermont Division for Historic Preservation.
Luke Alexander, Rutland City Planning and Zoning Staff. Ed Bove, Rutland City Planning and Zoning Staff.
Devin Neary, Executive Director of Rutland Regional Planning Commission.
We have some people on the outskirts too. I don't know. And has everybody gotten the sign-in sheet here?
Yeah, it's right there. So, okay. Connor Oliver, Channel 3.
Stephanie Berg, Planning Director with the Rutland Regional Planning Commission.
Gordon Burchilla, Rutland Herald.
And for online, I will note that myself and Devin are also noted online, but Jenny, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Jenny Ronis, General Counsel for the Land Use Review Board.
And how about Spencer?
Hi, Spencer Billings, intern for the Land Use Review Board.
And Catherine?
Hi, Legal Service Specialist for the Land Use Review Board.
Rachel?
Rachel Lamonaco, Business Director for the Land Use Review Board.
Caitlin?
Caitlin Hayes. I am one of the coordinators up in Chittenden County, District 4, and one of the reviewers for the South Burlington Tier 1A application. So I'm just listening in and learning.
You, Emma.
Hello, Emma Allen from Let's Build Homes. I'm our outreach and field manager, and we are supportive of Rutland's Tier 1A application.
Right, and Elijah.
Elijah Zwick, extern at the Land Use Review Board.
All right, fantastic. I think we have everybody. So just a little brief explanation on our proceedings. The Tier 1A was established by Act 181 of the 2024 and 10 VSA Section 6034 to exempt areas from Act 250 review. Municipalities may apply for Tier 1A areas after the Land Use Review Board has affirmed the municipality's regional future land use map. The Rutland Regional Plan was approved by the board on July 30th, 2026. Congratulations, that was brand new. 10 VSA, section 6034 requires a pre-application meeting prior to municipalities submitting an application. The board has adopted Tier 1A guidelines for how to review pre-applications and applications that the Tier 1A reviewers will be using to evaluate the pre-application. Public meeting is an opportunity for the municipality to present their request for the Tier 1A, for the board to ask questions, or the reviewers to ask questions of the applicant, and for the public to provide questions and comments on the pre-application. After the public meeting, the reviewers will prepare a draft pre-application response for the board to consider our future meeting. The board must issue a pre-application response within 30 days close of this meeting. The board will discuss response at upcoming meetings. Board's pre-application response will be provided to the municipality and the RPC. The response will also be posted to the board's database. A copy of the determination may also be requested by emailing act250.board@vermont.gov. We encourage everybody to be concise in your comments and questions. We'll offer each person a chance to speak, and if there's time after everyone is heard, we may then offer people who have spoken additional time to speak. This meeting is being conducted in accordance with 1 VSA section 312, Vermont's open meeting law. Are there any questions about the process? All right, hearing none and seeing none online, I'd like to invite Rutland to introduce their application, please.
Great, thank you. Devin's going to cue up the presentation. But thank you for having us. Thank you for coming down and for coordinating the bus tour. That was fun. There's a lot to see. So,
and Ed, I forgot the one key thing, the one cardinal rule that I forgot, because we're using AI to help us with our transcript, is anytime that the people in the room speak, we need to say our name first. So the minutes won't combine us all into large conference room.
So I'm Ed Bogue, planning director for the city of Rutland. And again, thanks for the tour earlier. And what I thought I'd do is quickly run through a little presentation, which is more for people in the audience probably than the board. It's a little overview of just a few things so that we're all on the same page. And then we can get into the comments and questions if that works for everyone. So I'm going to see Devin's computer for a moment. Okay, so we are the city of Rutland. Luke Alexander and I and Michelle Delpha are the three in the planning and zoning staff. Mayor Tom Donahue, who was on the tour but is not here now, coordinates the departments at City Hall, oversees our department, and has let us proceed and, kind of take on this application ourselves. So as Sarah had mentioned, the regional plan, the Rutland Regional Plan was adopted on May 19th. Approval July 30th, 2026, and we submitted the pre-application on August 3rd. Slide, please. And as was presented in the pre-app, this is our Tier 1A area. It lines up almost 100% with the planned growth area that was set by the Land Use Review Board. That is in the lighter purple, and the darker purple is our downtown area. And then just quickly, like I said, it matches up with that area, which excludes in the northwest part of town, Pine Hill Park in that area, and then some of the flood hazard areas along Otter Creek on the southern part of town. As was mentioned, 10 VSA 6034 is guided us, the city, and the application as well, but I just wanted to have these 9 points up here. Please don't read that. It's basically saying the 9 things that you can have to apply. So a municipal plan that's been approved by the RPC, boundaries consistent with the LURB's planned growth area downtown district, flood hazard river corridors, permanent zoning and subdivision bylaws, development regulations in the Tier 1A that further smart growth principles, National Register Historic District information, significant natural communities, A&R information, public water and wastewater, and municipal staff adequate to support the process as we move forward. So I couldn't actually find check marks on PowerPoint for some weird reason. So I hit, you can hit the next slide. So those are green lights, green means go. We feel we have those things checked off. So that kind of moves us to phase 2. So 7. So I'm just going to go over a couple of the maps that were in the pre-application. Again, the reviewers have seen this, but just for people in the room, water and wastewater really covers most of the city. Ted Gillen from DPW is probably going to arrive at this meeting a little bit later and can answer specific questions, but we have lots of capacity in both systems. I believe the sewer system is the largest in the state, but he can get into more of what that capacity is. But there's plenty to support the Tier 1A area and development that will happen. Historic districts, we have 3. 2 are national, and then 1 is statewide. And in doing the research for this application, we were kind of fuzzy on the one that's just north of the Woodstock Avenue intersection with North Main Street, because it wasn't added to some of our maps. So through the process of this application, we actually were able to finally map that district. So that is a state district, and the other 2 more towards the downtown are national. Natural features and parks is another thing that was discussed in the application. We've added more park district to the zoning map. Before, there was a few areas like Pine Hill Park in the Northwest, but we've actually taken some more of the properties within the municipality, like Main Street Park that we drove by today. Before, that was not in the park district, it was in the Main Street Park district, but the threat with that was it allows development. So now in the park district, we've cemented these in as open space, parkland, and again, that was something that was discussed in the application. I should mention now, the only piece of the Tier 1A area that is not in the planned growth area, and there's one parcel we drove by next to Clementwood Estate, and if you look all the way to the left on the map and you follow the Otter Creek out of town, in one of the corners you can see a green spot. So that is still in the RPC's one of their not planned growth area districts. And the thought is when that map amendment happens with the RPC, we're going to try to work to get that into the planned growth areas, so it would become part of the district. But that's the only place where the planned growth area does not line up with the proposed tier.
Can you put the cursor on that, Ed?
Sure. Oh, can I? Sorry. Tell me this is right there. That guy.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay. You ready? Yeah. Rare, threatened, endangered species. The only one that's actually in the planned growth area, some are around the edges in Rutland town and in city limits, but there's that swath of different shade of purple that is in our healthcare district along Allen Street. If when we drove up that today towards the hospital, it's called the Central Rat Snake. It was put in there in 2025. So that's where it was identified in there. And with that, we've included some language in the pre-app and actually the zoning regulations taking from A&R's model bylaw on RTE species. So we have addressed that as well. This is our transportation network. You see we're fully served. We have the bus, which we were on today, operates through the city, bike paths, rail, the street network as well. Yeah, guess all I have to say about that. So in the guidelines, one of the requirements, and this was also in the 6034 information, is something discussing form and scale and smart growth. And I just wanted to talk quickly about this because I feel it's the thing that really sets Rutland apart and our development pattern and our urban form. And you can see the background of this presentation, which is actually lifted from the RPC's presentations. You can see our street network and connectivity. And in the pre-app a little bit, we discuss about how the city was able to grow organically in all directions. This used to be a trolley town, meaning there were trolleys running out in all directions. Symmetrical growth and pretty flat has allowed the city to maintain that form. And again, it was developed before the automobile. So you see connected streets, sidewalks, landscaping, a lot of traditional development patterns. Land cover map reflects this. This is going to be part of our municipal plan, which we're working on right now. And the red and the gray areas are buildings or impervious. And you can just see how that's centered around the central part of the city. And then as you get out towards some of the suburban areas, you see it turns more green. And then the flood hazard area and the parks are greens and yellows. So the development mimics the form. And if relating that to smart growth, there are those principles that talk about connected street networks, choice in transportation, architecture, walkability. And on the left is a figure ground map, which shows the actual structures in the city. Again, mimicking the street network, which is on the right. And again, showing some denser development in the core. And then as you get outwards, becoming less dense. And again, the 4302 goal of, compact settlements surrounded by rural countryside. Rutland naturally meets that. We do have areas towards the outside of this that are more natural lands, but then once you get too far out of that, you're in Rutland town, which is an Act 251 acre town. So once you hit that, it's really the corridors are where you have the contiguous development out towards that line. And you can go to the side. And I was actually looking through the VNRC smart growth principles, and that picture came up. And I was like, oh, is that part of Rutland? It's not. But just to show what they consider smart growth in terms of like the street network and layout, I mean, you could just superimpose that on the Rutland City layout and you would have that. And that's important because, again, we're not growing outwards as much. So we're not worried about new roads and subdivisions on the outside of town. A lot of it will be infill because that's the only place we can grow. And we already have a connected street network. So in terms of trying to create compact centers and avoid auto-centric low density development, like we already have that. It's a lot easier to keep what we have than to try to keep new development from mimicking what the older is, because it's hard to build that now. Like you could not recreate this right now easily. And where this shows up is this is actually a John Adams map. Those longtime planners in the room. He did mapping of Vermont communities, and this is tax value per acre, again showing how our development pattern supports growth in the areas that we want it, which is the areas that are served by municipal infrastructure. Because if we can continue to densify that infill, it relieves the tax burden, relieves the burden on infrastructure to outlying areas. So it actually, our development pattern supports the development and like fiscal considerations that the city is looking for. And that's it. So thank you for listening.
All right, I'll move on to any questions from Tier 1A reviewers and any observations from site visit. So we, prior to this meeting at 9, from 9 to probably around 11:30, we went on a site visit this morning. The first 2 hours of it were via bus. And we traversed, I think, the majority of the city. And observed, I think, the whole peripheral area of the city. There's a lot to that. And then I think then we walked the downtown area. I don't know if there's anything that the people that were on the site visit wanted to sort of enter into the record in terms of any observations from the site visit, Tier 1A reviewers, is there anything?
Don't think there's anything I wanted to put on the record, but we should give, after we talk, we should give them, everyone who was there, a chance to. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you have anything for observations?
Nothing that isn't otherwise captured in the mapping in terms of, residential areas, all the different areas of mixed use and like what you described for the pattern of land use in the city.
Very good. Questions from the Tier 1A reviewers? I believe we had a preliminary list, and not to go through the whole list right now, but I don't know if there are some particular ones that we wanted to focus in on. Kirsten, I think you had some on infrastructure that you wanted to.
I don't know if you wanted to wait till your public works person maybe not be here. We could do those a little bit later.
Sure, I think he said he was gonna be here at
But I think Pete was also
2:10.
Did we want to give an opportunity too for anyone who was on the site visit to place observations on the record?
Sure.
Like that would be great.
Right. So remember, when we were on the bus, you pointed out a number of things. If any of those things, that you remember now that you want to get on the record, right? We all heard you and saw everything that we saw, but none of that's on the record. So this is an opportunity if there was something that you wanted to bring to our attention, and then get into this sort of public record. This would be the time. It's informal, but there's no pressure.
Right. We traversed a lot of streets. I'm not going to have you go through each and every one and talk about what Public Works had done in terms of street trees or sidewalk projects, things of that nature.
We talked about some of the housing projects. I'm just trying to refresh your.
I don't have anything specific. I mean, I could try to comment on everything. Unless Luke, if you have anything that jumps out at you. We talked a little bit about the industrial district a little bit. We could talk about that generally. We drove by the new development there, which was unique because, it had the housing exemption from Act 250, but that's the sort of thing that probably would be exempt in the future if we were lucky enough to get a determination. But, that was just administrative permitting through that.
Right.
And our bylaws have the piece now that if you have more than 6 principal structures or more, or you're creating more than 20,000 square feet, that triggers DRB review. So the sites right now, I mean, you could just develop something in the industrial district that wouldn't trigger Act 250 unless it was of a certain size. So by putting in that general regulation that talks about more than 6 principal structures in the 20,000 square feet, it kind of caps that administrative limit so that if you are a larger development that would have in the past triggered or still triggers Act 250, that gets board level review. So I think that's important to note that it's not just like a free for all type of thing.
Janet.
This is Janet Hurley, Land Use Review Board Chair, and I accompanied everyone on the site visit. And I also did want to point out that the industrial district, the zoning district, is really interesting because you allow residential use in it. It's pretty unique. I think most municipal industrial districts sort of try to separate out the residential from industrial. And you also pointed out, Ed, that it has the least sort of requirements. I think.
That's
I don't know if that's the right way to put it, but so that it allows for housing development in, you know, with the least amount of hurdles, I would say. So I think that's important to point out, and our route through town took us through a lot of those areas.
Yeah.
Through the city, I should say.
And this is Sarah Had. I think one of the things I was, there was a question that was asked in terms of a property that was under review. I think it may have been on Center Street that had a historic facade that was going through a whole process with the city of Rutland. And there are questions that you brought DHP in on. And I said, well, maybe that's something mentioned here back, because I think it was an excellent example of an observation, but then it's about the process behind that. I said,
Right.
absolutely, I think this is an opportunity for later to hear more about that process. So I wasn't sure if there was something. on that
Sure.
one.
Ed Vogt again. One of the questions we received talked about the process for historic properties and how those get reviewed. And this property right now it's a perfect case study of how it would work. Is it 62?
60
60 Merchants Row have applied to replace their second story window. It's a historic building, and application was submitted, and planning and zoning staff looked at it, and the first thing we did was refer it to the state office to get comments on that. One, our bylaws have that clause in there now for most districts, saying if you have a historic property to consult with historic preservation. So we did that. We received comments on the window design, which not to get too much into the application, but there were some concerns with the design that tomorrow morning, when the architectural review committee meets to go over the application, we'll look at those comments and use that as assistance in their decision making. So we could have that really apply to any commercial or any historic property in town where it's, you know, the process is where the staff immediately turns to historic preservation for comments to inform our municipal panels when we make the decision. So it's something we think has actually worked well till now. We'll see what happens tomorrow. But that's how some of that process would work.
Pete Costco. But would you have that referral if it was in the industrial district, for example?
Currently, no.
Okay. Are you proposing to change that?
We could. We started to talk about this on the bus a little bit, and it probably was inappropriate. But that is something we could turn into a general regulation to really touch on every historic property.
It's not inappropriate. It's totally appropriate to talk about on the bus, but it's just important to touch on it here.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we could, obviously that's going to get a little weird in the single family districts because, 50 years is the limit. And we saw today that, a lot of some of these ranch houses we drove by on the outskirts are technically could be historic.
Yeah.
So we would have to figure out a way to not, I don't know, there's got to be a way that we can include some kind of general regulation to keep that process for all the districts. And we're happy to do that.
I can tell by looking at your face that you wouldn't want to review everything that came through in Rutland.
I have many comments, but I can wait, so.
So Elizabeth Peebles.
Sorry,
Yes,
yes,
Elizabeth.
yes.
So this is Kirsten again. Just, I'll mention too, we had a handout that was provided to us, the participants who rode around the city on the bus and viewed all these neighborhoods and areas. And I think it'd be great if that could be submitted and we'll add it to the database.
I think it is.
Oh, it is already?
Is this in the database?
The map
from
Yeah.
today. I feel like I've seen it before.
It shows
Okay.
the route that we took, more or less, and points of interest, and it's helpful. We
Yeah.
covered a lot of streets.
Yeah, let's get that in the database for sure. So I have another sort of follow up. This is sort of my larger question.
Pete Costco.
This is Pete Costco. Thank you. So I'm really comfortable with the infill concept. But for example, I see in the sort of outskirts of the town, we have areas that are zoned in the industrial district, which is, and I don't know that much about zoning, but this is like traditional zoning, right? Like old fashioned zoning. We're talking about like you have the ability to do things in certain areas that are less restrictive and then more restrictive getting to like single family homes, right? And so if that's right, so I just have some concerns about, and I wonder why you I kind of wonder why you included some of those in your tier 1 area. So it seems like you're saying, we don't plan to have, we're infilling and we don't plan to have much growth in those parts of town or of the city. But by the same token, we're including them in the tier 1 area. And in some of those cases, they're the least restrictive zoning areas. So why did you include those, and would you consider not including them?
We included them because basically they were in the planned growth area. So right off the bat, they were included in that. So that's why it was, we chose to define the district based on that. And the other thing was the amount, if you look at the parcel sizes and the availability of land and some of the flood hazard area considerations and all these other factors that you stack up, you might not naturally see a lot of growth there. Part one. And then part two is some of those pieces of what I was talking about earlier about what would trigger board level review, even in the industrial district. We felt that there probably wouldn't be a ton there anyway, but what would trigger Act 250 was also a consideration. And then could we review it at the board level? So we wanted to include those for just if there was a larger development proposed, because any large development, if it does happen, is going to trigger the board level review, in which all the criteria would be reviewed against. So we didn't see a reason to pull it out of that district.
This is Pete. Again, I feel like I'm missing something though, because like just taking these two gray areas on the map, and when I say the gray areas, I mean the industrial district areas on the map. Those have the least, like you only have your, if I understood it correctly, and you can correct me, right? If I understood correctly, only if they are doing 7 buildings or
Above that,
yeah. So that doesn't line up with like the Act 250 jurisdictional trigger.
No, but those
either.
wouldn't trigger Act 250 anyway, probably.
That's a vote. Sorry.
Oh, that's a vote. Yeah.
Yes.
We're having a back and forth.
I mean, that wouldn't trigger Act 250 now. Like you
It
can
would if it was, 10 or more units.
Yeah.
Once we revert back, because the housing exemptions are interim.
Sure.
So it would be if it was 10 or more housing units or commercial development on over 10 acres, which I imagine most of those lots are smaller than 10 acres.
Right. That was part of the other consideration.
But at least there's that, right? There'll be some review. I mean, you have, some of them are in like this. Oh, that's outside of, yeah. Okay. I guess that's like my question.
Yeah,
so I kind of wondered when I first saw it, that was my first question. Why, the main thrust of your argument is that this is going to be infill.
Mm-hmm.
But if I was just focused on infill, I would draw the black boundary differently. And that just piques my interest as to why we have, why it's more expansive. And then the bit where particularly the gray areas have less.
Yeah, well, I think it's just like at the end of the day, it lined up with the planned growth area. Okay. And that's what we were, able to apply for. So I think we wanted to catch everything as much as possible. And then when infill, I guess could be contextual, right? There's infill within like the city, but then Rutland City itself compared to Rutland Town and other places is infill also.
Yep.
It's just a different level. So I think we just wanted to keep those areas available for the exemption that we could, because we felt our bylaws were strong enough that anything that would be impactful would get reviewed to the same level that you would review under Act 250.
Devin, yeah.
Yeah, Devin Neary, Executive Director of Rutland Regional Planning. I appreciate that question because I think a lot is missed in context when we're sort of looking at that 30,000 view of a map or a street network. What I think is really demonstrated in the tour today that it may be missed because, you know, we're driving on a bus is that the development that is happening now or proposed is really areas of opportunity and there's no significant sort of pattern to them. And I think that's because Rutland County as a whole has the oldest housing stock in the state, and Rutland City has an even older. So when we talk about infill potential based on the age of our current housing stock, that can exist anywhere. And what I think Rutland City's done so well with intention is establish a zoning framework, a street network, and this application in a way to open up any corner of the city for that development that has some context sensitivity. But as we saw when we drove through like Hickory or Forest Street or the proposed development that was part of the infill program, those very well could have been a single family home or this larger scale development that could have triggered Act 250 in the absence of the Tier 1 application. So I think based on the density and the built form and the availability of utilities, the entire mapped area stands on its merits on the technical pieces, but also on the intangible pieces of opportunity and old housing stock that, you know, infill may not be adding an ADU, it may be leveling the site, combining parcels and making a much bigger sort of multi-building, multi-unit development. So I think it makes sense because not limiting Rutland City, who's desperate to add, in our own analysis, 2,200 new units by 2050. That means the entire 7.6 square miles of Rutland City needs to be available in Open Act 250. So to me, they're indistinguishable. Lot sizes are similar. Housing stock quality is similar. The only difference is sort of there's a higher density of single family units now. That doesn't mean that'll be the way in the future. So I think it was the correct move by the city to include the entire planned growth area to really allow that intention and available opportunity. Because I think one thing that we're seeing on the bus tour is this energy around Rutland of opportunity that didn't exist. And this is the one element and barrier that can be removed that will be more substantial than any of the rest besides really freeing up the zoning. So I think it was an intentional smart move to include the whole planned growth area.
So this is Sarah had, I think that sort of leads into a question that I had. In looking at the observations from the site visit from this morning, you have a lot of the periphery of the downtown core is zoned single family residential. And observations that were made during that time, it's not just residential. We talked about the historic corner store, some of the historic commercial that had existed within those neighborhoods. So although not a lot of change is necessarily proposed at this time to those neighborhood areas, there might be elements that Act 250 relief might help with some of those commercial components coming back, so to speak. But I think what was helpful and part of the purpose of having this pre-application meeting is to help us understand. It's a lot of information to take in between the land use plan, the LDR for the city, capital planning. And one of the things that you had referenced is a housing analysis that was done in 2012, last updated in 2019. Would love to see that as an exhibit to help understand what identified needs you have, how you're going to meet them. And one of the questions I had was, does anywhere in the housing analysis, I'd love to read through it when I have a chance, when we get it, but does it call for a target number for different types of housing?
And both. The 2012 analysis really does not. And it was from so long ago, like it's almost not even applicable. The 2019 housing analysis also does not, but it was, we're still actually trying to track that down in the city. I know it was referenced in a municipal plan, but I don't know if it ever actually got formalized. Regardless, those are all before COVID. So the thing for housing targets we're going to rely on now a lot. One is the RPC in their housing work through the regional plan, and they did a housing needs assessment in 2023. So we're going to lean on that a lot. And then the city through HUD also did an update of our current conditions and just through the Distressed Cities Technical Assistance Program. HUD came in and evaluated our housing stock. It didn't necessarily provide targets, but that's what we want to lean on the RRPC for, because they have the most updated information. They did the housing analysis done by VHFA, and even in your regional plan now, you list targets in there. Yes. So that's what we're leaning on for a lot of our housing target goals.
Great. Other questions from reviewers? I'll go through I'm happy to keep on going through some of our questions, but did you have?
Yeah, I mean, I can jump in with some, and then if you want to wait for your public works person.
Yeah.
Kirsten. Oh, Kirsten Sultan. Thank you, Janet. So, concerning the $1 million of water infrastructure that's needed annually. So how will that need be met? Like, I guess I'm just looking to gain a better understanding of, particularly on the sewer side. And I understand, there's some initial, TIF project and certain plans, but, in terms of a capital budget and a commitment to ensuring that, the infrastructure needs are, continue to be met. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Maybe where there are limitations, like on the sewer side, are there any BOT limitations or major pump station upgrades that are anticipated? Like, just give us a bigger picture about that infrastructure and how the city will continue to meet that big, need.
Sure. And both again, and I'll let Tom or Mayor fill in a little bit as well. It's speaking with Ted, who will be here in a little bit. One thing we know is some of the water pipes are from the 1800s. So we have the constant need for upgrading our facilities. And it's something that is in the capital improvement plan. So I will be submitting that as an exhibit.
Great.
So you will see those projects. Every 4 to 5 years, the city's been going out for bond to target groups of areas to do this work. And so every year, and including the capital plan, there's the project lists that just keep coming. That $1 million figure was referenced from an old municipal plan, so I don't know if that's totally accurate today, but it could be more, less. So we've got those pieces that are happening daily, and it's at the top of everyone's mind because we have capacity in the system. It's the distribution part of the system that's we need work on. And then through the TIF, as you mentioned, as part of the new hotel, Center Street is also going to be upgraded. So it'd be sewer, water, stormwater under there. So a lot of the infrastructure improvements as part of the TIF are water and sewer distribution lines. So that's the other way that we can target areas to kind of get those moving. And it's a constant battle. And Mayor, I don't know if you want to say anything about that, but in your thoughts about how we're approaching the upgrades that we have to do.
Yeah, because I think I want to point out too, of course, the infrastructure that we have underway currently, like the combined sewer. Oh, Tom Donahue, Mayor. So, for instance, the combined sewer overflow project, the CSO project in Meadow Street, which we didn't get to drive down. We did turn left just before that, and I wanted to go past that, but it's a $7 million investment in that, which will make a big difference in that with those sewer overflows, water really retention, but also another $2.5 million in Meadow Street sewer separator. So dividing up that water sewer that's oftentimes combined now. That's almost $10 million investment right there. So when we talk about $1 million, it isn't much really compared to when we talk about the infrastructure improvements that we're making just within the what we call complete streets initiative, which is when we pave the street, now we do the water and the sewer first, and then we pave the street, and then we put in sidewalks and curbs. And we're doing that with intention. And additionally, I wanted to point out though, additionally, we just this morning did a kind of a cursory drive-by of the wastewater treatment plant because again, the road project's going on and we couldn't make the corner by the railroad tracks, which is under construction. But I did want to point out that we've invested historically tens of millions of dollars in these facilities that now exist to our advantage, going into future development opportunities. As an example, the water treatment facility can handle 3 million gallons per day. Is currently seeing 2 million gallons per day. So we have a whole 1 million gallon capacity buffer, for lack of a better term, in the water treatment plant. In the sewer treatment plant, 20 million gallon per day capacity. Currently utilizing 3.5 million gallons with, and that's measured in dry weather because of the overflows during storms does change that a little bit, but a dry weather measurement. So I feel like the community has invested so many millions of dollars into the infrastructure that exists today that puts us in a good position going forward. As far as what I consider critical infrastructure. I don't think that you can do these projects that we're looking at in the Fifth District and elsewhere in many communities because they don't have that infrastructure in existence that we've invested in historically that we have today. So I don't know if that's kind of a long answer to your question, but I think that number, like Ed said, is probably an older number that is probably seeing a much higher investment than that today on an annual basis than even then when it was created, just because of the upgrades that have been required to be done because of the pipe serve.
So
what year are they at 18 something?
Yep, 18 something.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to ask a couple, Scarce Consulting, I'm just going to ask a couple quick follow-up questions. So is there any part of the Tier 1 area that is not within the water and sewer district?
No.
I didn't identify any myself,
No.
just confirming. And in terms of, you mentioned the overflows, in terms of any, or I don't know if there's been any A&R violations and you're doing improvements to presumably address that. Do you, is the work and planning and commitment that's been identified and underway? Does the city anticipate that will fully address any A&R violations to the extent there are any?
Yeah, there. So let me be specific.
Thank you.
Give me a second.
But Tom Donahue, Mayor, you want to? Oh, go ahead. I'll start with that.
Okay, but I have, yeah. I
Well,
wanna make
just-
sure we
You know,
have it correct for the record.
And your name.
And both.
So we are under a 1272 order for CSO. So that's the impetus for all these projects that we're doing for stormwater, because we are an MS4 town. So we are under an order. And the only violation we have right now in our system is some of the trihaloacetic acid byproducts that we're seeing at some of the end of the dead end lines. So those are things we have been addressing. It's system wide. And so that's the only thing that there is a violation on. And it's technically the disinfection byproducts rule. And right now we have a consultant who's trying to reduce the trihaloacetic acid to comply with that rule.
It says, this is from the public works that currently Tom Donahue, but currently developing project to reduce, just they're called HA5.
Yes.
Yeah. Levels to ensure compliance with the DBP rule. But we contracted with a consultant who's developing a project to reduce the levels.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Here's consulting again. On the sewer side, it looks like there's in excess of 8 million gallons of capacity with the order of 1.7 allocated to other municipalities, leaving, residual, but of that balance, how much has already been allocated? Like how much is it known, how much remains to be allocated for development?
Ed Bob, and I'm going to introduce Ted Gillen from DPW, who came in at the perfect time.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I can answer this perfectly, but those numbers that I discussed with Ed yesterday, pretty consistent, historical from the water and the wastewater aspect. I don't think there's anything in addition that's been allocated anywhere else aside from, I'd say, Alpine Pipeline. They bought some allocation, I think 2-3 years ago. I have to look up the exact number. I'd have to do some digging around to get a precise number of what maybe the city might be committed to outside of this $3 to $3.5 million, 3 to 3.5 million gallons on average annually that we treat. But it's certainly nowhere close to the capacity of the wastewater plant, which is 20 million gallons a day.
Ed Bob, I just wanted to say, Ted, they haven't seen those numbers yet.
They haven't.
They haven't yet.
Okay.
So we were just digging into it, but we have the figures on what the actual allocation is for the tier 1A area, which is basically the city, and then what goes to other municipalities.
Okay, great.
So,
Thank you.
yeah, our wastewater treatment plant can treat over 20 million gallons a day. Dry weather, we get about 3 to 3.5 that we treat. The 20 million comes from additional capacity to treat stormwater on a heavy rain event. But that's why there's such a big gap between treatment plant capacity and what we actually treat from sanitary waste on any given day. So like I said, Alpine Pipeline, which, comes from Killington down through Mendon and Rutland town and eventually discharges into the city's collection system. They bought some additional capacity, but it's going to be negligible in the grand scheme of things, I'd say.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So this is Kirsten. This is my last question. Ed Bove's been doing a great job pinch hitting for you, if you will.
Okay.
So I presume when a developer comes into the city and is asking for allocation, you have some documents that inform how that allocation occurs. Like
Yeah, so
there's some like
Yeah,
an
we've got-
ordinance or,
Yep, so it's based off of ordinances, but we have an allocation application that is based off of the state of Vermont's rules for average daily design flow based on the type of use, based on the occupancy. So typically a consultant will come in with a big project and they'll have their basis of design, which mirrors that. But if somebody is adding a couple bedrooms on a house or doing something much smaller in scale, they can use that form, which uses the state's numbers and then comes to Public Works, review it for accuracy, and have to be granted because we have the capacity.
So this is Sarah Haddon, just to introduce you to her, because we're recording it every time that we speak, because we're a large conference room, we have to say our names. So, just in case you thought that was odd, I thought I'd tell you why. I think the other part of Kirsten's question that I know I have too is, it's sometimes tough as a municipality when you've been allocating for decades to keep track of who you've given allocation to, that's sometimes holding on to it and hasn't fully built out yet, and to try and track that against your actual flows.
Right.
So maybe if you could speak a little bit to the city system for dealing with that.
Yeah, to be honest, yeah, it is difficult and it's been disconnected as I look back on historical documents. I see different time frames, whoever was driving the ship at the time. I might see a spreadsheet over a several year period where it was tracked very well. And then there's a period where I don't think it was correct well. But in the grand scheme of things, now, when people come in for allocations, they don't just fill out the form, then we take the data and we stick it in our database and keep it going. With all that being said, I know I'm gonna say the overwhelming majority of the occupants, buildings in the city don't have a state permit, wastewater permit, or a recorded allocation with the city. So.
Understood, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Did you have questions for Annie? Pete, did you have another question? All right, I'll keep on going with a couple of questions. Something I want to come back to on historic preservation design districts. It looks like several of your historic sites aren't fully covered by your design review areas. How will the city tackle ensuring that the historic preservation requirements are met in those areas that aren't necessarily covered by design review?
At both. So that's something we're working on right now, and we have a bylaw that has a public hearing next month. And we are open, and that was one of the questions we had for the board was, what would be the best way to address that in our bylaws? Because right now we do have the language in there for the design review district, and we can see how the process has worked with one property. But you're right, it doesn't cover things in the MR1 or even single family residential or industrial. So like I had mentioned earlier, we would be okay with a general regulation that would cover that. But that's something we would need help drafting and putting together, preferably in time for the hearing that we're going to have on our bylaws. So we're ready to figure that out as well.
If I could have a follow-up about the current process, Quinn, sorry. So you've talked about currently how, you flag something as potentially being historic, talking to the division about it, getting recommendations from them, and then bringing them to the design review board. Or so maybe talk from that point on, in the design review districts, the requirement is to comply with the Secretary of Interior standards. So who right now, based on your current process, who's actually making that decision? And yeah, just to me.
So at both, and so it's the Architectural Review Committee, which is advisory to either the zoning administrator or the DRB.
Yeah.
So it would be either the administrative officer or the DRB that would actually set that in the permit and create conditions based on it.
Follow up. Sarah had, I think I had another one that I want to highlight on historic resources, which is per your draft LDR section 5972 has about provisions to preserve known sites for archaeology. What provisions are you making for sustaining unknown sites that might be impacted by development?
Again, well, let me refer back to the bylaws first so I can speak about what you're talking about. Again, this is at both. What section were you?
50, this is Sarah had 5972. And I do believe that you did speak to archaeological sensitivity, and just curious in terms of metrics or what have you in terms of evaluating.
So, well, right now, there isn't a general regulation on archaeology, and that's actually another question we had about how we would want to incorporate in our bylaws. It could be a general reg. It could also be highlighted in our conditional site plan review area, because I do not actually think, even in the draft, it talks about the archaeological review. And if you just give me a moment to find where that is. It really doesn't. It talks about aesthetics, preservation of historic sites and natural areas, protection of ag and forestry, but it doesn't really get into archaeological review. So we recognize that that's something we would like to put into the bylaws. Our question was, who should we talk to about having some language in there that would at least direct the same type of process that we kind of use for everything?
We could,
It
Right.
keeps coming up.
exactly.
I know
We're
it's
just,
not-
as this is Sarah had, as reviewers, we were talking about, we are going to provide time for state agencies, but since this keeps on coming up, and Elizabeth is here to give Elizabeth the opportunity to respond if she'd like to at this point.
Yes, Elizabeth Peeble, state architectural historian, and I already said this, Jess Robinson is our state archaeologist, and he is actually on the call. And so I suggest that we set up a time for the three of us to talk, and we can dive into details and all of that. I believe in your land use regulations under the PUD section, you have a section specific about archaeological sites, but I think it's specific, and I don't have it. I thought I had it right in front of me, but I don't. Specific to known sites. But within Act 250 review, it's oftentimes it's not known until somebody looks. So that can be part of the discussion that we have with Jess. So, and I'll hold off on the rest of my comments till later.
Sarah had, it's page 63 of your draft LDR, and Jess had his hand up. Jess, is there something that you'd like to say at this point?
I was just going to put my hand up for the exact same thing that Elizabeth mentioned. I'm happy to wait until comments to provide more detail.
A quick question, Pete. So you guys are gonna meet and talk about it. And I'll be looking to, just so we have a short time frame. So you don't have to come up with a final decision, but if you could let us know what you're kind of coming up with, because it sounds like it's going to be a mix of things.
Yeah, and our time frame is September 4th. It hit the 15 days before the public hearing to make changes to a bylaw.
Work out pretty well.
So that's what our internal timeline is. So it's even tighter for us.
Okay.
Well, this is Kirsten. I'm going to jump in quickly to add too. I mean, for us, this is also just, it's the draft. So,
Right, it's preliminary,
Yeah.
but we have a tight time frame.
Yeah,
and
to
if-
provide a response to this draft, we have 30 days from today.
Right.
But
Sorry, Ed Bo. For our sake, it would be great because if we could have the public hearing on the bylaws with something we feel would be okay for this board, even though I know it's a risk, to be able to have that at least, we have a public hearing set and then, we could turn around and adopt it right away, rather than dragging that process out. I know you have 30 days from today. But it's something we would want to start working on beforehand. The same with the historic preservation language and a couple other things I'm gonna have questions about.
And this is Sarah Hyde. I will say that the pre-application process is free and it can be reiterative. So we could actually do another pre-application too. I think it's really meant to be a time that we fully bake this as much as possible so that hopefully by the time you get to an application, it's a successful application. So if the city of Rutland want to come back after that bylaw adoption with another pre-application and check-in or something of that nature, absolutely, that's something that could be done too. But understand that you want to try and keep to that timeline. It sounds like a very tight timeline. I have faith in that effort. Just wanted to throw it out there too, that this can be a reiterative process.
Ed Bob, so if we were to make changes by early September to the document and would submit that as an exhibit to the reviewers, would you have a chance to review that within your 30-day response to this meeting?
So this is Sarah Had. I would say we are happy to discuss that with the city of Rutland. We might ask the city of Rutland to consent to extend out that 30-day timeline that we have to respond. So, but that's absolutely, I think, a conversation that we could have. Other questions from board members? Devin?
Devin, I have a question on process. In terms of like bylaw revisions, is there a statutory compliance element or a guidance that will guide future tier 1A applications so they know exactly what you're looking for? Because, archaeological review can be narrow or quite expansive. And I really am questioning the process as to like, are we trying to recreate Act 250 at the local level, and to what extent? Or is it, what's the LURB sort of intention when reviewing bylaws for conformance with that applicable functional equivalent standard that we have? Because it seems like in this process, it's sort of, chasing your tail through the dark to be like, okay, what is going to pass, what's not going to pass, versus when applying as a regional plan, it was so clear this is exactly what you need and when, by which we could apply our plan against. So is that going to be available for future applicants, or is that the expectation, or is it really dependent on the municipality?
This is Sarah Hadd. Excellent questions. And a lot of what we're doing, you were the first tier 1 application in the entire state of Vermont. And you were also the first regional plan applicant in the state. So Rutland paves the way for others, I think. So some excellent questions, and maybe we can take and encapsulate some of this and use it for others. I know there's that hope with the RTEs and coming up with the model bylaw, which other municipalities could utilize. And so absolutely appreciate some of the efforts that different municipalities have had that conversation together to try and create a standard for that. Because there hasn't been a standard. This is the first time that we've had in state law this process by which to sort of turn over the keys to Act 250 to a municipality. And so to answer your question, a lot of it drives, I think, and feel free to chip in here, is what the municipality wants and the level that they want. Because while Tier 1A would give an exemption to new development, there are also the existing Act 250 permits that you have to contend with, and you as a municipality are deciding to administer those. What tools do you need in the toolbox to administer those pre-existing Act 250s? And there's a pre-existing Act 250 permit that had a deferred area because of archaeological sensitivity.
Mm-hmm.
How do you want to approach that? You could potentially say that that is a existing Act 250 condition that you are not going to amend or considering amendments to. But if you want to consider amending, you perhaps want to have some bylaws that will help guide you in that process. So it's really meant to be municipally driven in terms of what standards you want to bring, but I agree that would be great if there could be a standardized one that other municipalities could look to. So is that fair enough, Pete?
I do, I agree. I think Pete Costco. I think your question about guidelines, I fully expect we'll have guidelines as we become more familiar with this process. And the other thing I just want to add to what Sarah just said is that in my mind, the things that Act 250 looks at, the criteria that Act 250 looks at, where there are not corresponding permits, are going to be some of the most important things that we'll discuss, right? So I have a lot of faith that if it's going to have wetland impacts or stormwater impacts, that Vermont has a permit system for that. But when it comes to historic preservation, they don't have a permit. They work with us, and we're all trying to figure out what the legislature intended. I don't think the legislature probably intended for them to now review every zoning application in tier 1 areas, right? But we want to make sure that there's, that when we turn over tier 1A exemption to the town, that we're not also overlooking something that isn't 22.
Devin, just to close the loop on this, I'm encouraged by that response, especially about locally driven, because, while I completely respect and appreciate historic pres and archaeological review, I do worry about implications as another barrier for development, just to make sure it's intentional and right sized, right? Given that this is a city with a lot of pre-development, so there's not a lot of open undeveloped lands, but also understanding that we don't have a significant more kind of robust and sophisticated developer pool here, and understanding that we're trying to build that developer pool, and by removing barriers that were under Act 250 and right sizing it for the city is going to be that thing that makes this a benefit versus just a repackaging of Act 250. So
Yeah, and both, sorry. The right sizing is the key word because, you know, our bylaws are effective, but they are lean. They don't just get into pages and pages of standards and numbers. So we want something, like you say, that addresses everything, but not overcooks everything to the point where it's a barrier to development again. And that's, I think, where the city is looking to come at this from.
So this is Sarah Had. I think that's an excellent segue. We have a couple minutes left and I have a couple more questions I'd like to get to. Into the municipal staffing requirements for Tier 1A. And I think you hit on a good point is you have lean bylaws, which is excellent. Except I think in some ways there's an interpretive factor. I think part of what we're looking for in this pre-application process is to make sure that if and when a municipality gets Tier 1A confirmed upon them, that they're successful in it. And recognizing as being a former municipal planner, there's a timeline under 24 VSA in terms of the time that you have to review permits as well. And so it looks like you have a pretty healthy volume of permits already. And just wanted to hear a little bit in terms of now, if you're taking a look at permits with existing Act 250 conditions, if you have an estimate of how much additional time it's going to take on your staff level to process those permits and what considerations you give into that.
And both. I'm happy you think that's a high volume of permits. I thought that was pretty low compared to other places in the state.
I said healthy.
Healthy, okay, that's
Just for
generous.
reference,
That's very
this is
generous.
Janet, what is that volume and
120, 30
per year?
per year, for averaging. So, well, we manage that comfortably as it is, with our staff. I think the changes that came out of S325 that didn't require everything to come over at once, and now it's going to be on a permit by permit basis, also relieves that a lot. You know, some of our Act 250 permits from the 70s and 80s were subdivisions, and those are pretty much gone through the system. So I don't feel we think it's going to be a huge lift that we can't handle, considering we're doing the local permitting for it anyway. So if we get our bylaws perfect, we don't anticipate much more time being spent to that. Again, we have capacity to do it. Luke's amazing, you know, with a lot of the day-to-day work. Michelle in our office keeps us running. We actually will have some more capacity freed up when this process is finished. We just did the zoning, the municipal plan, the TIF district. So there's a lot of these one-off projects that we probably won't touch again as a department for years. So we're pretty confident we have that capacity to handle that. I couldn't give you an exact hour figure amount, but I don't imagine it being more than 5 to 10 per week, if that, really. Yeah.
Any other questions from Tier 1A reviewers? Because we're at time just about. So if there are any other questions from Tier 1A reviewers, I'd like to turn it over to questions and comments from state partner agencies first. And I will say that the Agency of Natural Resources submitted via email their comments, which is why I haven't really asked any questions around significant natural communities for threatened endangered species, because I think they hit it with their comments. I just came in this morning, so I understood that we all have not really had a chance to read through them, but I think there were some constructive comments on that model bylaw development, some recommendations that seemed hopefully achievable. I do want to, if that's all right, segue into questions from our state partner agencies, and we'll start with in the room. So please, Division for Historic Preservation.
Great, thank you. Elizabeth Peebles, Division for Historic Preservation. I just had a couple of questions and then a couple of comments, and obviously, as we've said, we can get into the nitty-gritty in a separate conversation. The Architectural Review Committee, I did not see in your bylaws that there's any requirement that one of the members have experience with historic preservation. Have you all considered adding that in there?
At both, that's a great question. We have considered it in the past. It's certainly something we could look into doing again to have that in there because we have a pretty, good range of members of that board, but it's definitely something we could consider. And Mayor Tom, that process, is that Board of Aldermen driven? The committee structure, or is that?
Well, it's by charter, so.
By charter.
Yeah, it would take, it may need a charter change, it's a little bit of a diverse process, but it's not. Oh, that was a question that could be accomplished.
Elizabeth Peebles, so just a follow-up comment to that, even if you don't change one of the statutory positions on there, I believe you as municipality could set an internal policy that review board attend historic preservation trainings or something along those lines to get the review committee more familiar and more comfortable with the design review standard, which says that projects shall aim, I forget the wording, aim to meet the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation. Because I think one of the things that I saw when I was reading through it, I was wondering who either on city staff or on that review board is really comfortable with those standards so that if a project were to come in, there'd be some conversancy with it and the ability to help applicants understand it as well, because the average applicant really has no familiarity with them. And so trying to make that a little bit more accessible for their understanding.
There, Tom, I'd just say, I agree. I think that's a good idea.
Elizabeth Peebles. Follow-up question. I maybe read this wrong. Is it correct that a person could install an 8-foot wood stockade fence across the front of their building in this design review district and not need a permit or architectural review committee comments?
That is.
Okay.
And that was that, Luke answering that question.
Yes.
Yeah. And so Elizabeth Peebles, my comment just is that would not meet the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation because it would disconnect the historic structure from the streetscape. So I think that there's some opportunity to do a little bit of editing either now or in the future, because it doesn't have to be perfect from day one. You can have a plan to kind of align different parts of your bylaw, because right now it seems like there's a couple of things that contradict small things like that, like the fence. So
Ed Boak, is that something that when we have our discussion, we can go through specifics on how you might want that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Elizabeth Peebles. So right now you have your design review districts set up as a pretty tight core area, and a lot of the city is not within that. You've already said you're open to maybe expanding garden review with a broader element there. And so I think we can just discuss that in more detail. But I would note that I would say there are as many known historic resources outside of the current design review boundaries as there are inside. And that a lot of the city's resources, especially around the outside fringe of what we were driving around today, have never been evaluated. And so in your application and in your land use bylaws, I didn't see that you all were set up to have a process for how you would want to evaluate historic resources if they've not been evaluated previously. So, you know, we can talk about this in more detail, but I just recommend that whatever fits for you as a municipality, that you formalize how we would want that process to look. Because I don't think currently you have any locally designated historic resources.
No, that's correct. And Bo, is that something that could be in the town plan? Rather than, definitely not in zoning or plan development, but would that be a good town plan type of language thing?
Elizabeth Peebles, you can absolutely put it in the town plan to have design review be based on that designation as the trigger for design review. You would need to put it in the 4414 ERF category.
I'm sorry, I'm talking about the actual evaluating the other properties.
Oh,
Doing the evaluation.
Elizabeth Peebles, setting forward the process of a plan for evaluating would go in your town plan. Right now, I could be wrong, I don't believe your city bylaws and statutes have a specific body identified as the body that would make those local designations. And so you would have to at some point identify who is responsible for that. You can have it be a planning commission. You could set up a separate historic preservation commission. But you have to specifically state that somewhere in your town documents.
Okay.
And I don't think the town plan's enough to do that.
Thank you. Ed both. And you think that would go in bylaw, like the land development regulations? It just seems like it's not
it would, Elizabeth Peebles, it would depend on how you wanted to structure it as your municipality. Because if you said this is a responsibility you want your planning commission to have, you would have to put that in the roles and responsibilities for the planning commission charter or whatever, or ordinance or whatever your structure is. But if you say, no, we want to have a specific committee or commission that is tasked with this, then you need a new ordinance. And we have a sample ordinance on our website of how you would establish that new body to look at historic designations. And there are many different ways it can look. It's really up to the municipality. It just has to be formalized.
Okay.
Speaking of formalization, so the example project about the project on Merchants Row, Center Street, the comments that we had provided, we provide technical assistance to any municipality that reaches out. But for a tier 1A designation, if you are relying on those comments as part of how you are meeting the review of historic preservation needs, we would want to formalize that relationship in a memorandum of understanding to be very specific about what the expectations are, both for our office and your office, because we don't want there to be any lack of clarity about timeframe and who is actually the decision maker, because we don't want applicants to feel like they're caught in a game of tennis and not sure which party to look to. And so we can talk about that in more detail. And I think broad brush, that is what I had. Jess, do you want to chime in about archaeology?
Yeah, thanks. Jess Robinson, Vermont State archaeologist. Again, we can defer a lot of this to a more detailed discussion, but just to give some high level overview of what, the part of historic sites that is archaeology, below ground historic sites. In general, our office reviews approximately 450 Act 250 permits a year for archaeology. And of those, somewhere between 5 and 7 statewide actually require shovels in the ground. These are estimates over long term. Some years are more, some years are less, a lot depending upon the development and funding and tax environment in any given year. But it's a very small minority that actually requires shovels in the ground. And as a service to applicants to Act 250, we do all the initial review work in terms of desk reviews or field visits to determine archaeological sensitivity for those areas where archaeological sites are not yet known but suspected based upon land factors, historic maps, things like that. And that's certainly, vis-a-vis the technical assistance Elizabeth mentioned, that's certainly something we'd be more than happy to continue to provide. I would also say that in this particular Tier 1 community, as you all know, Rutland City is a very heavily built up environment. So I don't anticipate that there would be much archaeology, required or requested or suggested by reviews in this area, particularly since a lot of the floodplain of Otter Creek is sort of carved out of it and the natural areas to the north. And those areas, at least for pre-contact archaeological sites, are those sort of proximate to East Creek, Otter Creek, and the brooks, many of which are also heavily built up. So in a general sense, I would just say the archaeological potential in this particular Tier 1A community is likely very limited, but we would certainly appreciate some ability to provide technical assistance. And we'd be happy to discuss that further in more detail in a subsequent meeting. And I think that's all I have to say now. Thanks.
All right, this is Sarah Had. I do not think we have any other state partner agencies on the line or in the room, but if I've missed anyone, please feel free to identify yourselves now. Otherwise, be happy to open this up to comments from the public. Going once, going twice. We'll go to a comment from the public.
Sure.
Yes.
My name is John Kalish, and I am a Rutland City resident, long-term. I'm also a real estate developer and property owner in the area. One of the properties that I have, I believe was on your site tour. I wasn't able to make the site tour this morning. It was 16 Campbell Road, which is on the peripheral western portion of the city.
Yeah, we did.
You did. And that property has full infrastructure, municipal water and municipal sewer there. And it's a property that, because of initiatives like this, that we are seriously evaluating a very significant housing project, which would meet the demand. Someone had mentioned if there's a demand for housing, there's a demand for all types of housing, from senior to affordable to workforce. The demand's not the issue. The importance of, from my perspective only, the importance of a Tier 1A designation on this property from a developer's standpoint is the certainty and the predictability of the process, because lenders and investors both need that. From a construction lender's perspective, they need to know when the shovel is reasonably going to be going into the ground. From an investor's perspective, they need to know what their carrying cost is from day one, so they could allocate appropriately. By designating this as a Tier 1 venue, the city of Rutland, we still would need to go through the review process. We would still need to go through water, wastewater, stormwater, but it becomes more streamlined, more economically feasible, and more predictable. Because at the end of the day, it's about the math of these projects, and I like to mention that most projects, in my opinion, they get approved, but they never happen. They quietly die, and And it's because of the lack of predictability and the time it takes to get these permits. And I would like to, as a resident, I'm self-interested, would love to develop in my community rather than, deploying capital outside the community. And I say that as a resident, but there's a lot of these projects depend upon outside capital from investment from individuals that don't necessarily have the connection to the community. So I would urge the board to approve this designation, and I would certainly thank the city for making this application. I know it's been a very involved process just getting to this point right here. That's it. That's all I wanted to say.
All right, we have a hand up. Is that Pete?
Yeah. Pete Franzoni, Board of Aldermen, but I'm speaking as a resident, not on the board member. I just wanted to dovetail on what John said. Thank you. Thank you all so much, especially you, Ed. I've been following this effort since before I was seated. I think this is one of the best things that's going to happen to Rutland to help growth. I don't think the public really appreciates just how important this is and how much development can bring to our city. Rutland's been hurting for this for a long time, and I'm so excited. So thank you, everyone.
Is there anybody else in the room that would like to speak? Has not had a chance to speak already? I think we have maybe a few people online that would like to speak. If there's anybody that would like to speak, please raise your hand. Come on camera. Wave. Is there anybody online that would like to speak? If you're on the phone, thank you, Kirsten. It's *6 to unmute if you're having trouble unmuting, but I know sometimes that can present a challenge, so I'm going to give just a little bit of extra time. And I'm looking, and I recognize a lot of the folks online as being within Act 250, so I don't know if there are any, Emma, if there's anything else that you would like to say, or then we have our externs too. Okay, we have a hand up in the room. Sean.
Yeah, Sean Atkins, Executive Director, Rutland Redevelopment Authority. You can obviously probably guess which direction I'm going here. But I'd like to point to its importance, not just in the downtown core, but hopefully with our soon to be approved opportunity zone. Will be the southern half of the city as well as kind of the downtown core of Crescent Street. So even if it's not a TIF project, I think actually that's where this might have its biggest impact, most likely, if approved. Whether it's CHIP or anything else, there's a lot. The little land we have left is going to be proposed to being exempt from Tier 1A. I think it's going to have a major impact. So thank you for taking it into consideration.
All right, I'm still not seeing any hands up online. Is there anybody else in the room? Ed, would you like to speak?
I do. I have questions for you. Ed Bove, so the V-Trans, we have not received comments from V-Trans or any communication. There's a Tier 1A group that meets that we had some input back in the day, but specifically looking for guidance on Act 145 language and V-Trans referrals in our bylaws, what type of language we should put in there. And we haven't heard anything yet, so I don't know where we should turn to tackle that one. So that's question one. Question two is on Primax soils. I realize that it's a city, it's pretty developed, but there are Primax soils. So on that front, where should we be turning for bylaw language again? To at least have something in there to cover that topic. So those are the two big ones that are still outstanding in terms of statewide impacts that I know you review for Act 250. So we would just like some direction on where to turn on that. And I don't know if you're the right people to be asking that, or if I just need to hound V-Trans or AAFM.
So this is Sarah Had. We did get a response from AAFM saying that they were not going to be able to attend today, but they were going to try and file something with written comments. I'm happy to loop you in to them directly so that there is a name and a face at AAFM that you can speak to. And I believe at V-Trans, Melissa Marden might be the best person to follow up with. Marden. Or Chris Cloud, this was mentioned. I think particularly on Act 145, there was a study committee that was formed that Melissa spearheaded that wrapped up last December. I'm not sure where V-Trans is at right now, but.
Okay.
This is Pete, and Ari Rockland Miller is the person at AG who I would reach out to.
That was the person I was gonna, yes.
Sorry.
Absolutely.
I didn't mean to
Perfect.
cut you
Mind
off.
reader. Yes.
Yeah, Ari Rockland Miller, he's the 9B review, flow reviewer for us, and he would be the point of contact.
Thank you.
Any other comments from anybody online or in the room?
I'll make a comment. Sarah Furman from Cedar. I just want to thank the city for all the hard work. I know a lot of time and effort went into putting in this application, and being the first in the state is amazing. From a business standpoint, this is huge. Devin and I are overseeing the county, but this is our downtown, and it's really important to have this designation. So thank you.
Well, thank you. We're running a little bit ahead of schedule, but Bebe wants, yes, Quinn.
Sorry, if there is time, I was wondering to maybe move back some of the municipal capacity questions around enforcement and your current processes around that at the local level. But I didn't want to jump backwards if that wasn't our intention.
I don't think that there are any other public questions or comments. I was going to give a second bite at the apple for anybody that has already spoken that would like to speak again. Other than that, I think we do have time for some additional questions. Please.
Yeah, so these were on your list of questions beforehand, but obviously administered your zoning permit. There's an enforcement aspect to that. You'll be taking on Act 250 permits potentially. And so if you could just talk through with your existing staff what enforcement typically looks like, if you've done any formal actions in recent time, just your current processes around enforcement.
Sure. And both. So we currently do not have any enforcement actions happening. There are a few that could potentially be in the works. So let me tell you about how that process works, and I'll probably answer the question in that. It's really up to planning and zoning staff to monitor what's happening out there. And then we have a very active and new city attorney. He's been on for a few months, who we've been relying on heavily to help us at least examine what's out there now, and then with some of these potential issues we might be tackling soon. So it's really a function of staff, just like we would for a local permit, consulting with the attorney, and then, we're enabled to do it through 4451 or whatever, that one, but also through municipal ticketing. We have that option as well. So we could go either route on those, but with the attorney on board and active now, we're probably going to move in this direction away from ticketing a little bit, just because, we found that we can ticket a lot, but it's super hard to collect, and it actually makes more work down the line. So, we've been evaluating the strategy on that, but it is something that's just part of the normal routine of a day-to-day planning and zoning office, is conditions of permits and monitoring the city and following statute with how you do that. It's a pretty prescribed way, as you know. So it's very basic and very normal, I would say. I worked in a couple of planning offices now, so it's been the same for many years, I guess, that aspect of it. Like I said, we don't have any active ones right now. There could be some in the future. So, Luke, I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that.
I think a lot of Luke, I think a lot of enforcement gets handled informally to avoid notice of violation, and most of violations get handled at that point.
Yeah, encouraging compliance and
Yeah.
voluntary. Yeah, that's the goal. Great.
Quick, Mayor Donahue, I just wanted to mention, in addition to these two gentlemen, we have a staff of 4 in the building department that also does that enforcement daily. And so it's a larger team than represented here today. They're out actually doing after days.
But they don't do zoning work. That's just
Yes.
Talk about the code enforcement and so forth. Oh, okay.
So Sarah had, it's nice to have that level of partnership within the city though, and oftentimes different eyes will pick up different things and communication is probably very key.
Yeah, their offices are contiguous too. So.
Coming back to a lot of those, I appreciate, it's always nice when you can wrap things up informally. Do you keep any metrics of what that sort of informal looks like?
Luke, we have a enforcement folder internally, so even like we keep a record of kind of informal letters, like if we send just notifying non-compliance, and that we keep in electronic records.
Thank you.
This is Pete. So I'm not that familiar with the municipal. I'm sure you do have, careful rules, and then go to the environmental court, whatnot. The Act 250 enforcement is driven largely by reports from neighbors and citizens. Do you have a process for that, and how does it work?
Ed Bove, we do actually, the city attorney has drafted up a policy for how the building and zoning department should be handling complaints. So it's going through review right now. It's a standard operating procedure on what to do, because like you say, that is how a lot of it is driven. And I could submit that as an exhibit, but like.
This is Sarah. I think that might be helpful.
So I have another question. How this is Pete. Letting you take your notes. How often do you talk to Kim or Act 250? Kim Lichko, the Act 250 district coordinator, or other Act 250 staff? Is that something that happens from time to time, or?
Ed Bove, it does from time to time. I know Kim a little bit from being in Devin's role, where it was much more active. So now, we will see the JOs come through, which are very self-explanatory. So, if you need to, get involved, or how much it involves a city property or not. Unless it's an Act 250, a larger one within the city, that we probably would not communicate a lot, because we wouldn't have a reason to. Right now, I don't believe there are any Act 250 majors or any one happening in the city right now. You could probably double check that or not. So there's been limited communication with her. But like I said, from being the RPC director, there's a relationship already between the office themselves. So
This is Pete. In the past, when there have been Act 250 applications, who would be responsible for providing comments on behalf of the town? Would you be involved with that?
Yes, it would be me through the planning commission.
Yeah. Okay.
And I staff the planning commission.
This is Quinn, just, not, this is a question where you might not have a full answer right now, but just, if you've been thinking about, if you were to be granted tier 1A area, and a zoning application comes in, what your process would be to identify if there's an existing Act 250 permit on it, or if it's jurisdictional, because not all the Act 250 permits are mapped. So that would potentially be another step in your process as staff. So just curious.
Sure.
If you've had thoughts on that.
Ed Bo, so that's, I was confused by the question when you said they're not all mapped, not knowing if we had not mapped them in our pre-application or in general, they weren't all mapped. So that.
Us, not you.
Okay.
Yeah, in general.
Okay,
Yeah,
all right. So, Luke and I have been talking about
So
that.
sorry, I can provide a little bit of context that's helpful for others too. So on the A&R Atlas, some of the Act 250 permits are mapped. Those tend to be what we call base permits, which is just the original permit. A lot of those might have amendments. Other properties might have become jurisdictional via amendments, and not even all the base permits are mapped. So when you look at that mapping on the A&R Atlas, it is not complete. So.
Well, that's good to know because, we were relying on that a lot, not entirely because we knew there might have been something in there, but that's good to know. So we have been reviewing our files, first of all, because we would have kept things in the past from Act 250. So naturally those pop up and you see those right away. We also know the previous standards for what would have required an Act 250 permit. So if we don't see anything that we think probably might have been a large enough scale development, even if it's on the border, we'll dig deeper. Part of our due diligence as planning and zoning staff is to communicate with the Act 250 different groups around. And if that involves calling on particular properties, I think we know here what might have been borderline in the past. We would rely on that a lot. And then other than what we would have already in the files, and we're going through now, and Luke's actually going to be marking files like with bright lights kind of thing that says these are Act 250. We want to get that done. So at least you'll see what's there. And then again, I realize there's always going to be some that you might not know, but that's just where we just have to do our due diligence. And
this is Quinn. And when you say the files, do you mean the land records or your planning and zoning work? Or just curious. And what? Yeah.
Luke, we have a online reviewing process and there's ability to flag a property. So if it has an existing Act 250 permit, you can have it pop up or you review anything. So it'd be going through to each of those property files, putting that there. So if you go to review a permit, that pops up automatically.
Okay. And Quinn, again, this is probably my lack of understanding of the local process. When you get a zoning application, are you going into the land records for that property every time?
Luke, and not every single time. Sometimes you get led to it, but usually our just internal permit database, the spreadsheet.
And Quinn, I'm flagging that just because Act 250 permits should be recorded to the land records. So that could be a potential process that might be helpful when you're thinking about this.
Yeah, that's great. And again, if we know even if we think it's close, just to go to the land records right there.
Yeah.
That would be a great way to close that.
And then there can be the confirmation with our office too, right? Like looking at yourself, knowing the triggers, looking at the land records, and then also confirming, with the office, because to confirm that there's nothing to be transferred, that due diligence, I think, would be helpful. So again, when we talk about additional capacity this might take, that's an example, and there's maybe other steps that might be additional here that might need to be integrated or absorbed into your processes. So just wanted to flag that.
Great, that's really helpful on the land records part too, because that actually makes us feel better.
You can go ahead. You're probably gonna say something on the side.
Well,
You say
so
it.
Kirsten, so the earlier of Act 250, the permits were given to the permittee, the landowner to record. Sometimes you would think that they would be in the land records, but they're not for a variety of reasons. And we try to, over the years, catch up with making sure that recording occurs so that people have that source of information.
We do it now.
Yeah, the other just on the mapping, just so it's clear, there's, like was mentioned, a base permit symbol, there's a symbol put somewhere. For instance, someone might have obtained a permit for a 3-lot subdivision. So there's a permit, there's a symbol placed somewhere on those 3 lots, but it's not, just because there's no symbol on that particular parcel, doesn't mean that, like, not saying this very well. There could be
That's not
3
funny.
parcels that are under that Act 250 permit, but only one of them has a symbol on it. So the adjacent ones, you also have to examine that permit that's sort of in the proximity. And same thing when you get to the outer perimeter of the Tier 1A area, there may be permits that are mapped just beyond, or you have to evaluate those permits to determine what's the extent of the land that's under that permit. So it's going to be a bit of an exercise to come up with a good process to just make sure, you know, you do something reasonable to discover these and incorporate that into, you know, what occurs locally.
And this is Quinn, and again, these processes are still being worked out. We haven't obviously transferred any Act 250 permits over, but for all the reasons that Kirsten just noted, I'll highlight from my perspective. That's why I think there's still going to have to be, regardless of the due diligence you do at the local level, you'll probably want to have a communication with our office too, because there are all these nuances and that sort of thing.
And this is Pete, and this is what I was gonna say, the same thing as that. But also that I can assure you that Kim would be more than happy to assist you in that. And without getting all the details right now, there's all kinds of tips and tricks. These are old permits and old software that we're working with, and there's a lot of things that we do to try to figure this out for people who have questions. And eventually those questions are going to come to you. And we'll be you can be a resource for you. I assure you that Kim will be happy to answer these questions for you anytime you call. Like, hey, you know, because you know, you could have this icon on one parcel, but they may have purchased something else and built something else, and that's a -3 permit, and that won't be clear. It might be before they were recorded on the land records, but Kim will have those paper records and she'll do that. She'll help you with that research.
This is Sarah Head. I think this goes to the newness of this all for us, is we are considering standard operating procedures on our end to standardize this in terms of how we can interface and be a resource for municipalities that become Tier 1. I think the other thing to highlight too is we are undergoing the process of digitizing all of our paper records for the state. Unfortunately, Rutland is not fully digitized yet.
But they're on the list.
But they are on the list.
They're close.
And we keep on improving on the list. So we will have a standard operating procedure as we move forward for how this will work. Hopefully we'll get to a point where everything will be digital too, to provide more tools. So just, I think we've been likening the whole process to building the plane and flying it. And so hopefully that's a conversation that we can have too in terms of what we can do from our end to help support Tier 1A municipalities.
Yes, but this is Pete, even without SOPs, I just guarantee you that Kim will help you. She's doing it now for individuals.
Right.
And it'll just make it easier for her to talk to you, and she'll want to help you.
So this is Ed. So we actually didn't use the mapping part of the database. We went through the city and searched through every permit and then mapped them ourselves. Do you think we caught most of them in that regard?
So Quinn here. So I'll say there's still the issue that arises that Kirsten verbalized, which is typically when a permit is issued, it's associated with a single address. And it doesn't mean that that permit doesn't maybe, you know, apply to adjacent parcels or.
Right.
This is Sarah had, I think, you had that problem in municipalities where you have subdivision of parent parcel and children parcel.
Right,
How do you flag that original like subdivision permit for the parent parcel from the child parcels too? So I think it's
Okay.
to just try and equate it to.
Right, okay.
I didn't look, I mean, because our icons on our map are not all up to date.
Yeah, I didn't even.
So I saw yours and I didn't think to like, but that's one of the things that we should do.
Right, that's because that's how I did it, was I
Yeah.
went through it.
And probably the first step would be to like, see if they match.
And so we had, when's the last time we did a subdivision in the city? So long, like it's been a while.
It was too long.
Right, so the last major one was probably by the Hickory Street, with a new development, which would have been almost 20 some odd years ago for like a major subdivision, I think. So that whole parent-child thing, I can understand. But it makes me feel better in a way because I think we've caught a lot of it and knowing what the parents subdivision. Okay, but that's good information. And Kim, yes.
We're almost out of time and we reverted to more questions that we had because I think as this is Sarah had, as you know, we have a lot of questions and I think that's what the pre-application process is for is, and also being the first one that we're considering, we have a lot of questions. You're sort of hearing the inside ball as we're sort of thinking this through and how this is going to successfully work and how we stand this up. I just want to make sure that we left time for the city in terms of a response or any questions that you have now, sort of thinking this through.
All right, I'll go again. Ed Vogue. So you have provided questions for today. And we have a list of things to provide back to you. How would you like that response to you? Should we wait for your comments? Should we actually create like a response to your response with exhibits? What would be the easiest way to get some of this information back to you in the meantime?
So I think that you should, so what we did, the reason we provided you those questions is we met last week and we're like, oh, we have a bunch of questions. We don't have a lot of time to go through all these questions. Why don't we send them some of the questions now? And they can hopefully address them in the short amount of time that we have. So I think that if there are questions there that you don't think we've addressed today, that those are the ones that you should respond to. And if you think that we've done it, then don't.
This is Sarah had, I think it would be great to get, I think the second option that you gave of a written response back of the exhibits would be fantastic for us to enter into the record if that's possible within the time frame. It sounds like you are going to have some additional information that might be coming to us after September 4th or around September 4th. We are happy to take as much new information from the city as possible, but recognizing that we're going to start drafting the pre-application responses. Sooner the better on that front too.
This is Kirsten, unless the city would like to waive our 30-day performance standard for providing the written reply. I mean,
Or this is Sarah had, I think that you could also just say, fine, understood, we'll address this as part of the application if you felt comfortable doing that. So I'd say take a look through it. There might be some things that you absolutely easy enough to respond to now that might be helpful. I think there are some exhibits that we're looking for. If you could provide that, that would be great, because I think the intention of the pre-application process is to give you as much feedback, constructive feedback as possible, and make sure that there's a successful application.
So I think we will try to respond to this as quickly as possible. And as fast as we can with some of the zoning work that we have to do, but get you the response with the exhibits is one package back to you quickly. And then I don't think we want to waive the 30 days because I think we want to keep moving forward quickly. So interested.
And I just wanted to say that, since our pre-application was put in, the how quickly that you addressed that and responded with some questions for us to answer. And we're here today really speaks volumes about how seriously you're taking this process. And I just wanted to know how much we appreciate it, because sometimes these things could be submitted and then disappear for a while, and we're wondering. But instead, you were so quick to establish this day-long visit to Rutland and bring the whole team. I just want you to know how much we sincerely appreciate that. It really shows a commitment on your part to this process as we see it. So thank you.
Thank you. And if there is anything else, maybe that's a good note to end on, but is there anything, just very quickly, anybody online or in the room that would like to speak? If not, I entertain a motion to adjourn. A minute early.
Okay. Thank you.
Well,
So moved.
So moved. All right. Let's take that as a second. All right. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Fantastic. We're adjourned. And Rachel, will you stop the recording for us?
And take a day off.